The RTÉ Rugby Podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.
All right, you're very welcome along to this week's RTÉ Rugby Podcast. Round 5 of the URC is in the rear view mirror, and we're on to the international window coming up in November. We're going to run through the weekend games that were, because we had some decent matches. The Inter-Pro derby between Connacht and Ulster at the Aviva Stadium. Leinster making 5 wins out of 5, and Munster having their first defeat as well. I'm joined because it's Neil Treacy here. It's not Hugh Cahill. Hugh Cahill is phoned in sick early this morning, so we've had to make a last-minute change. And so this is Neil Treacy with you, if you're not familiar with me. We've got Liddy, as we always do, on the podcast, and Bernard Jackman as well as Fiona Hayes. So, guys, you can call me Hugh if you want today. You can call me Neil. I don't mind what you want to do.
Fair enough, Hugh.
We'll see how it goes. But look, listen, guys, we'll get straight into it. We'll start with the games that were on at the weekend. And we'll start, I suppose, with the Inter-Pro as well, because that was the main Irish interest. And Connacht, 36-11 winners against Ulster. I was at the game. Like Connacht, Bernard, I suppose I'll start with you. Was it a case where Connacht brilliant, were Ulster pretty bad? Was it somewhere in between? Can you give us the early thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Connacht were excellent. It's probably their best performance under Andy Farrell, and they didn't allow Ulster play. I think you meant Dan Mcfarland wasn't happy afterwards because there was a real lack of composure in his side, and their execution was horrible. But when I had a good look back at the Connacht's defence, and it was outstanding. And that's been their big weakness of them for the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, they had to score 35, 40 points to be sure winning. And it's interesting, the change in the back room. Peter Wilkins, who was the defence coach, is now the senior coach, along with Dewald Senegal, and then obviously Andy Friend as a kind of a DOR. And then they brought through 2 Limerick lads, Mossy Lawler and Colin Tucker, as kind of assistant coaches, guys who come through the academy in Connacht, having obviously came through Limerick Rugby, and that's I thought Colin Tucker's defence against Munster was very good, but in some ways I was kind of saying, well, the conditions were poor. Munster don't really have an attack, so it's easy to shut them down. But Ulster's attack has been motoring quite nicely, and not just reliant on maul tries. And they shut them down. Got 3 tries from defensive pressure, which is ideal. And then obviously they got a lovely set piece try and a phase attack try. So a real all round good performance. But Connacht and their line out, actually, apart from their line out wasn't where it needed to be, where it should be, or will need to be. But apart from that, it was a very, very strong performance.
Yeah, and Fiona, you were shaking your head there as Birch mentioned the line out. Like it's been an issue with them for pretty much all the season so far.
Yeah, so I'd actually missed a game, so I watched it back. So I was kind of shocked to watch the first half to see how they were so dominant without having that line out functioning. And I thought as well they had spoke about maybe their penalty count, and I think they'd also given away 10 penalties by half time as well. So it just goes to show like that their offence, everything seems to be taken, and if they can sew up those 2 areas, you'll be hit with a really, really, really good team. They were just exceptional to watch. And my favourite, as Bernard talked about it, my favourite part of the game is watching the defence, and they were animals out there. It was brilliant. They just chased Nathan Doak from the first ruck. I mean, he hadn't a second. He was constantly under pressure, and he probably hadn't seen that type of pressure. And we saw that in the Ulster attack then. Yeah,
and like even specific to the defence, like the maul defence in particular, because that was an area with them last year that was like a massive red flag, that they were just conceding maul try after maul try close to their own line. And you look at the amount of times in that first half when Ulster had penalties and decided to go into the corner and set up what is usually a pretty formidable maul from their own part, and they just couldn't find a way through. They were getting a yard or so before the maul was just getting held up, and they were breaking off towards the side. Like that, those were massive wins in the first half for them.
Yeah, massive wins, and I remember last year I loved that Mouldy as well, and I gave Graham Roundtree a call down in Limerick because I was amazed how Munster's maul defence had absolutely just come up massive levels, and he was just explaining the little details around tiny things they'd changed in training, and you can see that with Connacht they obviously tweaked a few things, and their setup, their want, I suppose, is another thing to get in there, and it just excelled in that first half, and Ulster didn't have a sniff.
Whereas they're the most fun team to watch in the URC, Connacht. Because, I mean, you don't know what you're getting necessarily week on week. I've seen them 3 times out of 5 live this season. And, like, you know, it was the Bulls game, it was the Munster game, and it was the Ulster match. Granted, I'm leaving out a Dragons game and they're, you know, that they were beaten and where they weren't particularly good. But it seems whether they win or lose, like, either way, you're absolutely getting entertainment with them.
Yeah, 100%. I suppose, like, they're fun to watch on both sides of the coin because you're not quite sure what way it's going to go. But, like, everyone will go back to consistency now again because, you know, it's another win following a loss. But in fairness, the performance was pretty good against Munster as well. So it's possibly a little unfair to point at the inconsistency in terms of performance over the last few weeks. To me, like, they're right on the cusp. Like, I mean, they're very close to being very good. I thought the physicality they brought, particularly around in their attack, like in terms of their clear outs. Just watching the game back last night, the kind of huge venom in the way they attacked the ruck. Thought Niall Murray was really good in parts. They're a really good side when it clicks for them. And I suppose 2 things that kind of jumped out just on what Bernard said was definitely great to see 2 more kind of Indigenous coaches getting a crack at it. And I suppose it was, you know, there was a bit of a break of sorts for James Collin over in France in that regard the last few days as well. But just looking at, there was a lot of talk about him playing in the Aviva before the game, and maybe the crowd wasn't huge, but the atmosphere was good. And I wonder, just is doing a kind of double header derby day with any combination of the 4 provinces playing each other, is that kind of something that would be, you know, obviously they tried it in Wales a lot the last few years, didn't, you know, with mixed success, but maybe that's something that would kind of be another profile boost and another kind of PR coup for the league and for the game here at the minute, you know.
Birch, was that something that was happening when you were there at Dragons, that Judgment Day at the Millennium Stadium?
Yeah, no, that was a huge part of our revenue stream, to be honest. All the regions did really well out of it. I think was it popular? Was it popular? It wasn't popular with the hardcore fans, but unfortunately they were outnumbered massively by the casual rugby fan in Wales, who, you know, love rugby, love Welsh rugby, love the Principality Stadium. So they sold tickets and I suppose got addresses and email addresses and contact addresses for people that they couldn't ever really get a hold of or get into Rodney Parade. And even the better supported franchise or regions like the Ospreys and Scarlets, it did open up new fans, people who wanted to bring their family to the Principality. And look, at the tickets were, you know, they weren't expensive. I think you could maybe have a family of 4 for 60 pounds. So it's very reasonable. But the revenue did go back to the region. So look, and the players got up for it. This is the big problem in Wales, is that for the Welsh regions, is that they're used to playing in front of small crowds for the normal, or they were for the Pro 14s, obviously improved now under URC a little bit, but for them the idea of getting to play in the Principality in front of 50,000-60,000 people, you know, was a huge thrill for them as well. So it kind of worked for everybody, really. And the idea, obviously, hope, is that people go to the stadium to watch the Dragons because it's in the Principality Stadium, because they get to watch the 4 Welsh regions, and they eventually the following season or later that month, you know, wander into Rodney Parade. I don't think we've seen that happen, but, you know, the idea is somewhat logical.
Is it something that could work in Ireland? Like, I know just from the Connacht example last week, it's not a decision that necessarily went down particularly well in certain parts of Galway. I'm sure there were a lot of local businesses that maybe felt their nose were put out a bit, you know, losing a decent match day revenue. But is it something that could work in Ireland if we had a round of games at the Aviva Stadium some weekend?
Yeah, we could do it. Like, look, I'd love to get back to the days where a Leinster-Munster game would nearly fill it in its own right. You know what I mean? Where there's that rivalry and level of competition, but unfortunately that seems to have slipped away a little bit. Look, at Leinster at Christmas can get decent crowds, not as many as before in for that European game. So yeah, well, look, I'd love to see a sellout crowd for 2 derby matches, but it's obviously complicated to pacify the local sponsors, which obviously tend to do well on match day and maybe have facilities in the sports ground or in Ravenhill or in Thomond Park, which they can't replicate in terms of entertaining clients and things like that. But look, whatever we need to do to try and open up the game to more people, I think is worth looking at, even if it's not on a regular basis, but on a once-off.
Sorry, the other interesting one on that we kind of all forgot about because COVID happened after the vote, but was that all the rest of the GAA stadiums beyond Croke Park are now essentially available. So, I mean, the thoughts of, like, Leinster have obviously moved Munster games at certain times of the year to the Aviva, but the idea of maybe, say, Munster moving a Leinster game to a Parky Queeve or a Gaelic grounds, or moving a European Cup quarter-final there, or any of the provinces, bar possibly Ulster, doing that, like, that opens up a lot of possibilities as well, you know?
It certainly does. And Fiona, like your Thomond Park neck of the woods, how would it go down if you were to find out Munster were moving an Interpro away from Thomond up to Dublin?
I wouldn't be too happy about that now. It wouldn't go down great. Look, I suppose it's, you can understand why it was done, the whole capacity thing at the time, but with Thomond Park, it's we've seen, I've watched Munster play up in the Aviva, I've watched them play up in Dublin, not at the minute that they're much better, but it's that Thomond Park crowd when it gets going. I suppose it's the home thing, and the surrounding areas, the pubs, the bars, everything is absolutely blasting. So there's great atmosphere in Limerick, and we wouldn't want to be giving that away too quickly.
Yeah, and look, in fairness, like I can't remember, was it Andy Friend or who was it after the game, like, did kind of, when they were asked about it, they did say, look, it was a big thing to move the game up there, and had they'd put a bit of pressure on themselves by moving a home game up to Dublin, and had they gone out and taken a bit of a beating from Ulster, they might have looked a little bit foolish in hindsight. So obviously that was kind of playing into it as well, and they handled that pressure. But it kind of does, if you look at it, just the stadium and the wide open space, nice firm pitch, it's a pitch that absolutely just does suit the way Connacht like to play the game, Bernard, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's definitely something I think that the players bought into. I think as well we need to recognise the fact that was absolutely must win for Connacht. I mean, Connacht would have expected Munster to win in Ulster or win in Ospreys, Leinster to win in Glasgow. And if they had have lost that game, the other 3 provinces would be on over 20 points, and they would have had 6 points, and that effectively meant European qualification was pretty much over at this stage of the season. So I think we have to understand their mindset, and potentially, likewise, Ulster maybe feeling that they're a little bit further ahead than they actually were, maybe overconfident and expecting to come down to Dublin, Connacht giving up home advantage and being able to go through the motions and win. But like, from a Connacht point of view, even at the table, even look at the table at the moment, that loss to the Dragons has put Connacht in a very, very tricky situation in terms of European qualification, which is one of their goals. And even now we haven't beaten Ulster at home. Effectively, they're still 8 points behind the third Irish team, and obviously have to go away to Ulster later on. So every game now is absolutely crucial for Connacht, and that's good. It's good to see them being able to perform with that pressure. But I think we need to, recognise that Connacht were more desperate and needed to be than maybe Ulster were on the day.
Yeah, they certainly were, and that was something Andy Friend said as well, that there's a massive difference, even just aside from the match points, between a 1-5 or a 1-4 and a 2-3 record. After the first 5 games as well. I might just move on to Ulster as well, because we mentioned Dan Mcfarland's comments after the game. I'm just going to read out some of them as well, because he was asked about the performance of Connacht, where the game was won and lost, and he says, you know, it was really the first half with all the penalties they failed to convert. And he says, they defended our maul well in the first half. We weren't able to break them, and the guys on the pitch have to put their hands up. It's not good enough. We have an exceptional maul, and I don't accept that kind of parity from us. It's not good enough. The guys on the pitch are accountable for that. I know what they're capable of. Is it difficult? Of course it is, but it's not the standard I accept from them. And then just a few minutes later as well, he was asked, like, it was a very simple question. I was in the room. He was just asked, like, you know, you learn, you know, people say you learn more from defeats than you do about wins. What did they learn from the game today? And it was a pretty cutting assessment of his own team, because he says, what do I learn? Do you know one thing I know about us? We're not good when we're favourites. I find that so frustrating. We'll pull monster performances out when we're playing teams like that on paper are much better than us. I'm not being disrespectful to Connacht here. We were favourites tonight, and I don't think we play as well when we do that. To me, I find that frustrating, because me as an individual, any competition I'm in, I couldn't give an F whether they're good or not. I just want to crush them. I find that frustrating. Like, he really put it out there. He really left nothing to the imagination with what he was saying after that game, Fiona. Like, he wanted to make it clear and put a bit of pressure onto his players, I'd say, because he had spent a few weeks probably defending them after games when they had won with bonus points but were making a lot of mistakes. And I think this was the moment now where they had a defeat he was actually happy enough to kind of put that mirror back up onto his players and show them the mistakes there and then.
Yeah, exactly. I think you said it, Neil. It was kind of refreshing to see that. You know, I mean, you know, as a coach, when it's time to protect your players, and you know when it's time to call them out. And I suppose in the heat of the moment, especially after that game, he would have been seriously disappointed. I mean, they were out hungered, they were outworked across the pitch for the whole 80 minutes. As I spoke earlier, the 10 penalties in the first half, they just didn't seem to convert. It was just they lacked line speed, they lacked aggression. We spoke about Nathan Doak. They didn't protect him. Billy Burns, I suppose, on the night didn't offer much. So for him to come out and say that, it's really good. It puts the onus back in the players. And I'm sure that bunch of players will absolutely go back to the drawing board and realise that they have to be better. And, you know, for their coach to call them out, and especially in a press conference, it's put a bit more pressure back on them, not on the system they're playing, not on the style they're playing, but they actually want the physicality and the rugby knowledge of the players.
Yeah, and Wes, like, I mean, he pretty much just summed up what the difference has been between Ulster and that next tier of teams like Leinster, or, you know, the best of the rest in Europe as well over the last 2-3 seasons.
But I mean, we've spent loads of time and everyone has kind of navel gazing about like all these systemic issues that, say, Munster have that prevents them from competing with Leinster and with the top teams in Europe. But I mean, maybe it's about time the same kind of autopsy was done with Ulster in some ways. Like, I saw Stephen Ferris tweeting last night between the Ireland under-18s club, schools and under-19s camps that are gathering now. There's 96 players called up. There's 12 from Ulster. There's, you know, they have a lot of the advantages that are trotted out that Leinster kind of naturally possess. Like Ulster possess a lot of those on a smaller scale in terms of having a very large city at the centre of things, in terms of having a very developed network of feeder schools. You know, at the senior level, like, there hasn't been a shortage of funding, there hasn't been a shortage of big name players brought in. You know, Dwayne Vermeulen obviously yet to come in this year. So yeah, I mean, they're probably underperforming for a long time now, and like, I don't really know. Birch might have a better insight on how that's been addressed, because it probably hasn't had the same light shone on it that it has in other places, you know.
Yeah, I think they had big issues around their academy, but I think Kieran Campbell, who's now moved on, he's now the attack coach in Ealing. He did a lot of work, and they actually created their own bespoke program, which is different than Leinster's, because even though there is private schools up there, the level of funding that goes into them from those schools in terms of coaching and facilities, etc., would be far less than what you see in the big Dublin or Leinster schools. So they started to try and put an arm around those players a little bit younger, try and share the responsibility of developing with the schools or the clubs, and they have had some success about that. You know, likes of Hume and Ballatloon and Lowry, etc. There's there's a crop coming through Dave McCann, but unfortunately that's worrying Wesley, that stat in terms of their low representation across the 18-19-year-old level, and that's that's not good. You'd like to see an increase in those numbers, but look, it is what it is. Kieran Campbell's moved on now, and you'd like to think that there's some creativity around how they're going to develop the players, and I think that's the big issue for me, is that each province should have their own unique way of developing players, because they all have very different demographics and nuances around where the players come from. But for some reason there seems to be this idea that a generic model as such will work for everywhere, but I don't think that really understands Irish society.
In terms of the short term, Bernard, like obviously we're a bit down in the dumps on them today, but they're still second in the table. They're only a few points back from Leinster. That was their first defeat. And if you're going to have a defeat like that, you know, having a 5 week block of rest leading up to your next game probably isn't too bad as well. Like, they're not in a bad position whatsoever. So in terms of the short term, what do you think they actually can do this season? Bear in mind as well, as you mentioned, Dwayne Vermeulen coming in a couple of months' time.
Yeah, look, I think they can turn it around. They're missing Cooney, who has been their go-to guy. I would forgive Henderson and McCluskey for being quiet. That was their first game of the season, and it does take 2 or 3 games to get up to speed. They have Vermeulen to come in. They have Carter, who didn't play, who's their club captain. So there's weapons to come back into that team, or players who play to get better. Ravenhill's a fortress. Like, they'll be there. Look, I can't see them not qualifying for Europe. Can they get silverware? They'll have to improve a lot. They've had an easy draw. They played Zebra away. They played Glasgow, Benetton and Lions at home. So they're 3-5 split in terms of home and away games. And as I said, one of the away games is a gimme. And the 3 home games weren't against top quality opposition. So they have had an easy start. I think Dan was very conscious of what he said post-match, because he knows they're going away in holidays. He wants to set that, in their mind going away and come back and try and fix it. So you'd like to see a reaction. Obviously Vermeulen is playing that Babas game. So that's going to delay his arrival, but he will have an impact, and it's very early days. I mean, by middle of December, they should be fully loaded, and we'll see where they're at then. Absolutely.
We might fly through Munster and Leinster, because we have a busy month of Irish action coming up ahead of us. But on Munster, was beaten by the Ospreys. Was that probably the performance we thought we were going to be getting when they went out against the Scarlets and ended up putting 43 points past them? Was that game against the Ospreys on Saturday night? But what we actually thought was going to happen a couple of weeks ago?
Possibly was. In hindsight, the Scarlets were just absolute muck for the last period of time, so they probably got away with a lot there. Yeah, look, it's probably similar to what you said about Ulster in terms that they're not in a bad spot, in terms of the wins and loss column. But yeah, I mean, I don't think a lot has really changed with Munster since last year. It's kind of the same conversation we keep having every week with them. Is the game going to evolve? Signs of progress. Obviously, Sneeman's injury has put a huge dampener on things. So yeah, I mean, look, I expect them to kind of trundle along and win 4 out of every 5 games they play. Whether we've seen to date any evidence that the same problems at the end of the season aren't going to manifest again, I don't think we have, but I don't think we've seen kind of anywhere near enough a first choice settled backline selected really to kind of judge that either. It's been a lot of chopping and changing. Dale Landit was away obviously as well. So again, you'd be hoping there's a lot more in them, particularly in terms of their attacking game. But I think I think that it's been Connacht are probably the team that have changed the most of the Irish teams, I'd say. I think there was a huge hoopla the first few weeks with the rebranding and the South African teams and all the rest, but we've kind of settled back down into very familiar patterns now for right across the league, I think.
Yeah, Fiona, what was your assessment of Munster Saturday?
Yeah, very sloppy performance. I thought Strewn. I thought I'd say Holly Davidson has gone off John Ryan's Christmas list. I rewatched the scrums again, and I think she was correct. I couldn't get over that Nikki Smith. They were scrummed off the park at times. Very rare to see that in a Munster performance. Line out was sloppy at times as well. I suppose they were unlucky for that first try. They were always going to go back and look at it in detail. So, you know, stuff that had probably worked in the past around mall setup and that, they'll probably have to look at that again if they're really scrutinising things. I think Andy Friend got it out there that they really need to scrutinise the big teams. But look, just in general, very disappointing performance. I will say I was excited at times watching Jack Crowley. I thought he tried a lot of things and mightn't have worked a lot of time. But the more game time he gets, we'll see. He was trying things. He was kicking from hand. He was grubbing through. He got a couple of good 50-22. So there is excitement there in that back line, but it's just chopped and changed every week, as Wes said. You don't know who's playing centre. We were talking about Ben Healy 2 weeks ago. He got a few minutes at the end. I'd love to see them settle down. I know Diolande was away and he's back, but it just centre partnerships is somewhere where I would be slightly worried about. We seem to haven't settled on that. I don't know who's going to come in. You know, injuries will happen, but it seems when we play those big physical games, that's when we get caught out. And Ospreys weren't even that physical. They were probably just way more up for the game. Yeah,
and Bernard, is that a kind of a knock-on effect of the restructured URC, that teams are kind of feeling the need to chop and change sides a little bit more because, you know, there are less games, so obviously less opportunities to spread out the minutes between players?
Yeah, it probably is, but like Ospreys had no choice because they didn't have their Welsh internationals. So with obviously Wales playing New Zealand on Saturday, a game outside the test window, the regions had to give up their internationals. So that paints, I suppose that makes it even probably more damning to lose to Ospreys minus you know, they're better players or they're international players anyway. Yeah, and I understand, you know, Van Graan has to mix and match for sure, but obviously you would expect a team that goes out to perform, and that's what the second string or the third string who went to Scarlets did. You know, I agree with Wesley. Scarlets aren't going very well, and the Ospreys were probably set up better to attack. I thought Toby Booth has done. I think he's done a great job, but I thought the game plan that they stuck to was exactly what you need to beat Munster on a night like that. Whereas the Scarlets obviously want to play a lot of rugby, and that gets them in trouble quite a bit. So that pragmatic game plan, you know, Rhys Webb just breaking around a ruck, just runners off his shoulder, never really putting any wit on it. You know, getting domination at set piece, being very regimented in your kicking game, and having an experienced goal kicker like Stephen Myler to capitalize on those penalty opportunities. It's not rocket science. It's old-fashioned Munster Cup rugby, but they did it to Munster the other night. So look at, again, it's kind of like Dan Mcfarland. Munster been winning without really you know, blowing the house down. And Leinster, in fairness, you know, I think Leinster from the Dragons game, you know, they weren't happy. They got the win, but they went out and put in two very good performances since then. And, you know, and that's a sign of a good team. I think, you know, you don't need to lose a game. You shouldn't need to lose a game to realise you're not where you need to be. And I think Munster and Ulster, you know, kept talking about, oh no, but you're winning. There's no problem. Whereas I think Leinster, you know, they realised how poor they were against Dragons. Delighted to get the win, and obviously have come out now and had two better performances and won again. And that's the difference, I think, at the moment, just psychologically. You know, I'm sure Munster will bounce back from this, but the really good teams don't need to lose to understand where they're at.
Yeah, and quickly on Leinster before we move on to Ireland, Bernard, like they look sharp on Friday night.
Yeah, very sharp. Their skill set, their understanding of how they want to play, their level of trust in their defence, the physicality. I thought some of their counter-rucking was obviously something they really focused on to get after Glasgow, and it was very effective. Hasn't been a big feature of the other games. So you can see these little subtle changes in what they want to do based around the opposition. And look at they're good. They should be winning every game of the URC given the squad they have. But there was a lot to like about their performance and the strength and depth they're building up now. You know, with obviously Porter's a loose head. They now have a sub-front row of Keane Healy, Dan Sheehan, and Michael Alatoa, which is kind of where you want to be able to beat, you know, the La Rochelles, the Toulouses, etc. And yeah, I think they're far from perfect, but they're motoring along very nicely.
Yeah, they certainly are. Let's move on to the Ireland squad, because this time last week you were here on the pod and you were probably debating some of the potential selections Andy Farrell was going to be making when he was going to be naming his Ireland squad that afternoon or that evening. He did name the squad, Kieran Frawley and Dan Sheehan, the two uncapped players in it. The standout headline, Joey Carbery and Harry Byrne are the understudies to Johnny Sexton. No room for Jack Carty. That the right call, Wes? I'll put you on the spot there.
Yeah, I probably would have, like, whether it was the right call or not, I certainly could have seen the logic of maybe why he's been omitted in the past. Like, it's been well flagged in terms of consistency, in terms of, like, maybe going back to... Look, they've obviously seen things in camp with him going right back to 2019, let alone on the field, that has soured them on him somewhat. But you do have to give fellas the room to change and to improve as well, though. And, like, to be fair, the way he's playing, but, like, I know Bernard mentioned it on Against the Head on Monday night, but, like, even the way he spoke post-game after the Munster game, he just seems like a guy that's matured on and off the pitch, that's taken a leadership role. And, like, I'm just not sure what kind of a message it is really to omit him from the squad completely. A guy on the top of his game like that, for one unproven case and one case of a guy who's let's face it, who's not performing to his potential at the minute in Joey Carbery. So, like, I agree that he wouldn't be starting for Ireland, or that he may not even be in the 23, but I mean, surely you have to reward form at a certain point in a wider group like that. And I think there's other instances of it as well, like less noticeable, but like I think someone like Jack O'Donoghu's very unlucky not to make that wider group. I think he's found a proper home for himself as a 7. I remember way back when he was playing under 20s coming through, he was in the same team as Jack Conan, and he was probably more talked about, but he was always maybe lacking that power that Conan had. And it's almost taken them 10 years to kind of repurpose him into a position that makes the best of his particular skill set. So I think he's a guy that's unlucky as well. There's probably a few more cases too.
Well, like, I suppose the thing when you bring up players who are unlucky, you kind of have to say, where is he going to fit in? Because, like, if you're looking at the list of back rows, you've maybe Tyke Byrne, second and back row, whatever. Gavin Coombs, Peter O'Mahony, Jack Conan, Caelan Doris, Josh Van der Fleer, Nick Timoney. Like, which one of those gets dropped out if Jack O'Donoghu's coming in, or like, or are you just adding in another body, which ultimately might not necessarily be doing anyone any good?
You're possibly adding in another body. Has Nick Timoney been consistently better than O'Donoghue? I'm not sure. He's probably had a couple of more eye-catching moments. But I mean, has Peter O'Mahony been consistently better than him? For 2 years now? I'm not sure.
That's the headline out of this podcast now. Where's Liddy is dropping Peter O'Mahony. Going back to the out half call though, like, is Andy Farrell in a difficult position here, Bernard? Because we're 2 years out from a World Cup, and we've probably spent the last 2 years saying he needs to stop picking just the absolute form player, and he needs to decide who are the guys going forward long term, who are Johnny Sexton's understudies, and give them the time to actually blend into the role, rather than changing his mind every time an international window comes around.
Yeah, but is Harry Byrne, is that the bet he should make? If Johnny's going to go to the World Cup, and it looks at the moment like he probably will, you know, is Harry Byrne going to get enough games? Plus, obviously, Harry Byrne's robustness at the moment is a question mark, to clearly be the next guy. And then you've also got Joey in there. So effectively, at the moment, you've got doubts about Joey and Harry in terms of his robustness and in terms of being able to do what
you have that robustness worry probably about all three of them, to be totally honest, don't you?
Yeah, probably, and that's maybe why someone like Jack Carty, who is fit and ready to go on form, might have been a nice guy in the squad. I think Jack Carty has been very harshly punished or treated for the Japan defeat in the World Cup. I mean, and there's not as if there's any player at international level, even outside Ireland, who haven't had a bad day. And but it's how they've developed from that. And I think Jack Carty looks to be more mature, a stronger leader. Exactly what Ireland need. Like, let's be honest, because Ireland don't have, well, from what we've seen, a really rigid kind of attacking philosophy or clarity around how we play. I think the 10 for Ireland, their necessity to be a leader, to be a game manager, is more important than it is for a lot of other teams, because it seems to be quite loose. Obviously, this is the way they want to go post Joe, but it seems to be quite loose in terms of how we want to play. So you're really relying on that 10 to boss things, to put people into position, etc. So the fact that Carty looks to have developed that side of his game should be a bonus. And Joey, it's definitely not part of Joey's game. Joey's more instinctive, and obviously Harry may have it, but it's not proven at that level. Harry's is probably in there because of his talent as a passer and as a footballer. So it's a big gamble. I think it's a big gamble, because you realistically could say we're going to come out in November not any way closer to knowing what that depth chart behind Sexton is, who for me is clearly number one. So that's not really good planning, you know. And then you're going into Six Nations, which we know is the time when Irish coaches have never experimented, and then you're another 5 months closer to getting to a World Cup. So I think that's the area that's probably there's the most spotlight on, and Farrell and my cat could be proved right. I mean, I do think Joey has suffered from Munster's lack of an understanding of how they want to attack, and obviously in some of the games he's played, they haven't really been on the front foot. So just because you have a dominant maul 5 meters out doesn't mean you're on the front foot. So maybe with an Irish team who are dominant in the collisions against Japan or Argentina, Joey will look more at home, and I hope that's the case, because I think he has a huge amount of potential, and I would love to see him, you know, refine that confidence, etc. that he had pre-injury. So yeah, there's lots of question marks, and I suppose the next month will tell a lot.
I'll put you on the spot here now, Bernard. If you're the Irish head coach, who are the three out halves in your squad?
Johnny, Joey, and Carty.
At the
But
moment.
I think with Carty, you have someone in form, ready to go straight away, robust, and that's a good place to be. I think to have. Yeah, I think with all three of those, you've got Johnny, who's clearly number one. You have Joey, who's the heir to the throne, and just needs to confirm that. And you have Carty, who is bang in form, level of experience, level of leadership that's ahead of the others at the moment.
And Fiona, I was making the case why Jack Carty mightn't have got selected there a couple of minutes ago. I'm playing both sides of it here now. So, like, Jack Carty at the moment is 29 years old. He's going to be 31 when we hit the next Rugby World Cup in pretty much the final is, I think, this there tomorrow, 2 years from now. So Jack Carty is going to be 31 by then, which, you know, it's not over the hill by any stretch of the imagination. If anything, you might think it's pretty much bang in those prime years for him.
Yeah, it's banging those prime years, and as Bernard spoke there as well. I mean, we saw him. I saw him bossing that pack around the Aviva on Saturday night. He's really grown as a character. He's loving that captaincy role, obviously involved in the leadership group, and you can see it. And that's what you want from a 10. And the thing I don't understand is, you know, as a coach, you're looking at form constantly. You're really looking at who's in form. And from those selections, you know, other players would be wondering, you know, if I do pick up my form, you know, will I be selected? It's baffling to me. I think Jack Carty, I'd say himself, was a bit shocked, because he said he spoke to Andy, and he told him exactly what he needs to work on. And we're here talking about how he worked on that and how he's gotten to a place of consistency consistently. I know some people don't think he's consistent level when it's the top games every week, but from what I've seen this season, I think he's pulling the strings. I think he's getting that part working, and that's exactly what we need in there to back up Johnny. I'm not sure also about the other two. Joey, I don't know. I'm a big fan, but it hasn't happened. We're all waiting for it to happen. It hasn't happened yet.
And then the next question is, what way is the game time going to be split up next month? Because like, if you look at the game against Japan, obviously we saw in 2019 how much trouble they can cause Ireland, and we saw in the summer how much trouble they can cause Ireland. And I think, as was pointed out by someone yesterday, I can't remember who, that you don't necessarily want to be throwing out an experimental team against Japan when you've got New Zealand a week later, because you kind of want to be able to build up towards that game. And then if maybe one of those two games doesn't necessarily go too well, the temptation might be there to put out a strong team against Argentina all over again to finish off that block on a high. So there could be a situation where, like, trying to find the scope to experiment and to try out new things is definitely going to be difficult in this block of games.
Yeah, like, I suppose you're not really quite sure what way Argentina are going to come. They're, unpredictable, to say the least, in November, typically. But yeah, I mean, you probably do want to hit out for New Zealand. If that's if winning against New Zealand is the priority of everything, I would imagine you want to go full strength against Japan. And like, the performances they've given against us the last two times means you don't exactly have freedom to experiment wildly anyway if you want to get a result. So I think the most you're seeing maybe is a deviation of a handful of players from the preferred 15 for that game. And then, as you say, those results are probably going to determine the extent of rotation against Argentina. And, we're back into the old thing then. We're around to Six Nations. There's pressure on, the IRFU prioritise results in the Six Nations.
Three tour test of New Zealand the following summer as well.
Yeah, it's just slipping away on you constantly. And look, it was harsh for Andy Farrell in the timing of his takeover and running into COVID and etc. But yeah, I mean, we need to see some kind of evolution in terms of a clear identity for the team, I think. But are we going to? I don't know. I'm not quite sure when we're going to see that, to be honest.
We'll make the call 2 years out. But like, I did find it interesting, like yesterday, Johnny Sexton saying, for example, that they are talking. It's not at the forefront of the conversation, but there are references to in the World Cup in 2 years' time, so that it is being kept on the horizon. And I suppose I certainly found it the most surprising part was that Bernard, I might put it to you, that he was saying in the past that never would have been the case, that they were always just talking about the here and now, the one step at a time mentality, that 2 years out from a World Cup, they weren't even really referencing it.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because the sound bites we've heard from Joe Schmidt in terms of his review of the Rugby World Cup was he thinks he made a big mistake a year out talking about the World Cup. So I don't know if you've picked up on that, but he basically said that he feels he lost focus by looking 12 months ahead, and historically he'd always been about the next game, the next opposition, and he felt that was part of the reason they underperformed. So it's interesting now that they're talking 2 years ahead. So it's contradictory to what he felt let them down. So it's going to be interesting. Whatever happens, we need to probably do something different. So whether 1 year was too late and now 2 years out is the right model, we'll find out. But you'd wonder, is there any real thought process behind it, or is it just Johnny has decided that that's the best way to go? And in fairness, he has such power in that group. He can drive that through and make it happen. So I wouldn't question that, but it's just interesting, as I said, based on what Joe Schmidt. We obviously didn't hear much about the World Cup review, just a few sound bites from David Nucifora, but from Joe Schmidt's point of view, he certainly felt that's a change he made that potentially, unstabilized the group or the project.
Maybe we've actually made so big a deal out of this World Cup cycle notion, and it's actually all just nonsense. And you do the South Africa thing of just completely bottom out 2 years out from the tournament and just pick yourselves up and go from there. maybe we've completely overcomplicated all this.
Yeah, we don't have a Razzie. We don't have a Razzie come in and save us. We don't have 14 or 15 world-class players playing outside the country. So, I don't think no one would copy South Africa's model for sure. It worked for them, and credit to them. But I think Wales. So, I was in Wales for their World Cup cycle, or part of it, and they certainly had a way of preparing for it that Gatland had tried and tested. Obviously failed with Ireland back in Lons, but he adapted it over the course of those 4 World Cups since then, and got them to a semi-final, and they were very close to beating South Africa in a semi-final when they were punch drunk with fatigue and injuries. So I think it is okay to. Eddie Jones had a very clear philosophy around what they saw as being their World Cup cycle, and it came up short in a final, but they were closer than we were. So I don't think there's any harm in having a plan. It's just as long as it makes sense.
We are running out of time. I do want to speak about the big change in the women's game, because Adam Griggs is going to be departing at the end of the upcoming test matches this November, and Greg McWilliams, an old coach of yours, Fiona, is going to be coming back in. What can you tell us about Greg McWilliams? Obviously, he's got a pretty good reputation based on what he would have done with Philip Doyle down the years, and he's gone on and kind of bettered his career, and now he's going to come back all over again.
Yeah, I've always been a massive fan of Greg. I suppose when I was in the women's game, he's probably one of the first coaches that brought in really examining detail around things. You could be sitting on a bus. This is the norm now, but you could be sitting on a bus back then, and he'd bring up your laptop, and it could be where your foot was and cleaning out a ruck. He really examined the little things in the catch, pass, under pressure, stuff like that. He went into real detail at the time, and it served us well when we went to that World Cup and we played the All Blacks. I believe he was pulling the strings massively behind that. He had us sharp and ready to go, along with the other coaching staff. So I'm really excited for him to come in and work with the girls. For me, watching the girls over the last few times as well, I spoke about that catch pass. It just, under pressure, it wasn't there, and that's the skills under pressure was gone out the window when they were under fatigue and everything. So I think he'll really bring an improvement in that area, and obviously he offers a lot of experience, having gone to America as well and coached over there. So it's exciting times. Yeah,
and as we know, obviously there are a lot of long-term issues that have to be sorted out before Ireland can be back, competing with the better teams in the world all over again. But in terms of the short term, is there scope for a pretty decent improvement over the next, let's say, 12, 24 months?
Definitely. I mean, that's the thing about it, is the players are there. We, a lot of talk has gone about outside factors, and that is it. That's involved in it. But the players were there, and the players underperformed. And watching them week in, week out, in AIL level, playing with Munster, Connacht, Leinster, whichever, what I saw and showed there was very, very different to the players I've seen enjoying their rugby. So I definitely think he'll bring a bit of that back in, and we'll see a far more exciting Irish team.
Bernard, is Greg someone you've encountered a lot down the years?
Yeah, no, I know him very well. He just finished being director of rugby in St. Michael's when I coached there before I went to France, and I've kept in touch. Would have spoken quite a bit when he was in the US. He's been doing some consultancy for World Rugby in terms of, I think it's coaching coaches, tier 2 countries coaches, and I think it's the perfect appointment, to be honest. I think he cares about it deeply. He understands it. He's he has a good relationship with the players who brought success to Irish women's rugby. I'm sure he'll tap back into their passion and expertise, and I think he understands as well that the solution is in the 15s game, not the 7s game, and unfortunately that's been a strategy that's been driven for the last 7 or 8 years, and we've been promised we could be brilliant at both, and that hasn't happened. So I would like to believe or hope that he has made that clear in terms of accepting the job, that he can make the changes or support the domestic game properly, so that we can get back to the level that we were at 15s. So yeah, really positive, a big step up, I think, a big improvement.
Yeah, and very best of luck to him. We are pretty much just out of time. Wes, I know you did want to mention the USA bidding for the Rugby World Cup, and well, they're bidding for one of the Women's Rugby World Cups, and they're bidding for potentially two of the men's tournaments as well. I think they're saying 2031 is the one they're most likely to be going all in on. Looking forward to that, yeah? They're going to do it?
Yeah, I'll try and get down on the accredited list for that one if it happens. But
Vegas, Wes.
yeah. I just have no idea how they're going to fund this.
Private equity has been brought up a couple of times from what I've seen, which raises a few red flags.
It's raising a few red flags, and it's like, I don't know, do USA Rugby have the ability to go and source that, or does this become a World Rugby sourcing private equity thing? Like, until it could have changed now, but I know 2-3 years ago, like, for example, a player going to play with an Eagles 18s, 19s, 20s team would have to pay their own way from, say, Texas to, they might have a camp in Canada where they play their Canadian counterparts at the end of the week. They'd have to pay their flight and their board. That's the kind of level of funding issues you're at with that organization. They declared bankruptcy not too long ago. Like, it's always been the white whale for World Rugby to capture this American market, and it makes loads of sense. But, you know, I hope the detail of it is matches the kind of fantasy, so to speak.
Certainly does. Very quickly, guys, what would your thoughts of it be? Is it a bit of a stretch given where they are on the pitch?
No, I don't think it is, because look how much Japan improved in that. Obviously, from the England World Cup 2015, that was their big improvement. But then they kicked on again for the home World Cup. So as long as it's far enough out, I think they can improve. Obviously,
but if they were to do this, do they have to kind of match the resources they're putting into a World Cup bid with what they're putting in on the pitch as well, and what they're giving to the team?
Look, I think the problem is that game against the All Blacks, it was purely domestic players because it was outside the window. So they're not as bad as that, but they have a long way to go. They are putting money into the domestic game through this MLR. And
there's not much link up between USA Rugby and the MLR, though. It's pretty independent.
There's a lot of foreign players in it, but at least there's some sort of a domestic pro game now that they could make stronger over a 5 or 6 year period. But I think they probably do need. I think America, people have talked about it for so long, they maybe need that home World Cup to get everybody on the same page and to get something that's a lasting improvement. I mean, it's very worrying for North American rugby. Canada obviously haven't qualified for the World Cup, losing to Chile in a playoff, and USA have to qualify for one next year through playing Chile, actually. So it's to lose two countries that historically have been at every World Cup and not see them prosper or see them continue to decline would be a very sad state of affairs. Well, it's great to see the South American teams developing. I think from a World Rugby point of view, or they'll just want guaranteed revenue from that World Cup. That's going to be the key. So maybe that's where the private equity comes in, where World Rugby get promised X amount, and it's private equity who take the risk on it. But yeah, I think it'd be a positive, to be honest.
All right. Well, we're completely out of time. We'll leave it there. Bernard Jackman, Fiona Hayes, and Wes Liddy, thanks a million for joining us. Hugh Cahill, we presume, is going to be back next week. That's been the RTÉ Rugby podcast. Thanks a million for listening.
The RTÉ Rugby podcast, sponsored by Canterbury. See the new Irish men and women's rugby jerseys at canterbury.com.